Hello Internet, Seth Skorkowski, and one of the things that I've said over the years is that my group and I prefer skill-based tabletop role-playing games over class-based ones. And inevitably I'll be asked, what does skill-based or class-based mean? Fair question, no one's just born knowing that, and then I have to try to explain it in the comments, which really isn't the best medium for that. Or I'll get comments from people who believe that my saying that I prefer skill-based games must mean that I must hate class-based games, and because they like class-based games, it means that it's now a personal attack against them, and then incoherent rage ensues. So what I'm going to talk about is class-based games versus skill-based games, and the benefits of each. Both of them have their strengths. I've been putting this video off for a while now. The problem is that just because there are so many different kinds of games, with all these different mechanics, and there's countless exceptions to everything, I'm going to have to approach this topic with very broad and general strokes. Recently, I tallied up that I've played 22 different role-playing games, and that's published role-playing games, so it's not including all of the homegrown ones that I've played. Now, some of those I might have only played once and barely remember them, while others I've played extensively, and that's not including editions. So I've played 5 different editions of D&D, but I'm only counting that one once. So if you were to count editions as different role-playing games, it comes to 29. And as impressive as that number might sound to some, that's only a tiny sampling of all the different games out there, and for the longest time I really wasn't sure that if my own experience with games was really enough credentials to finally speak about this topic, but I finally had to accept that while no, I haven't played every single game out there, this is a subject that I've known and thought about for many years now, so I was really just procrastinating putting this video together. There are hundreds of different tabletop games out there, and all of them are different, so you can't really categorize all of them into two absolute black and white categories of class-based or skill-based. And as you read more RPGs, you're going to find more gray zone than absolute. So all of this to say there's a great number of exceptions, but most games, when you stand back and tally all of their aspects from afar, they end up leaning into one category more than another, with a few of them that are just kind of out there doing their own thing and not really in either. Okay, general speaking disclaimers done, let's get this thing started with. And we're going to begin with the type that I think everyone should be familiar with, and that's class-based games, sometimes called level-based, which is the term that I most frequently use and prefer. Class-based always sounds sort of hoity to me. I'm upper class and you're lower class, peasant. I don't know, maybe that's just me. The undisputed king of these being Dungeons & Dragons. Once again, broad stroke, generally speaking, the traits of a class-based game is that the player character belongs to a class, such as I am a wizard or a rogue, and these classes have skills or abilities only available to members of that class. Your class might also determine the number of hit points you have, such as wizards get 1d6 hit points while rogues get 1d8, or determine a character's combat capabilities. As they play, characters gain experience points into a pool, which once it hits certain level thresholds increases that character's level, such as I'm a 7th level fighter, and I'm an 11th level cleric. I'm a 2nd level thief, 9th level Skullrexian duelist, which is a house mod class from an obscure source that I'm sure you've never heard of, but it's totally a real thing, and I promise I didn't make it up and isn't overpowered at all. So can I play it? I suppose. I mean, you promise I'm not going to regret this, right? No way, dude. You're not going to regret this one at all. Okay then, let's do it. As characters gain levels, their skills, special abilities, and possibly hit points increase, turning these characters into more powerful beings. And that's pretty much it. And level-based games do have a few perks to them. First, GMs can scale the obstacles, such as, this adventure is suitable for characters 5 through 7. Character levels work as a good shorthand to help ensure that an adventure isn't going to be too challenging or not challenging enough, just depending on whatever the character's levels are. And that is a fantastic tool, especially for newer game masters who might not feel comfortable guessing for themselves if the player characters are going to be appropriately challenged. Next, class-based games have easy-to-follow improvement paths, with a character class as a character's gaining levels and the player is limited to a controlled set of options, such as, when I reach 3rd level, I gain 1d10 hit points, 1 spell slot, immunity to disease, and I get to choose from one of these 3 options. So we still have options, but it's also limited. Again, this is great for new players who like seeing a very clear and easy path to follow. Next, players know their role, such as I am the healer, I am the tank, or I am the spellcaster. They fill a specific and important role in the party, and everybody knows what it is. I never considered that this was a thing until I was listening to some players who had gone over to skill-based games, and they were struggling with the fact that the roles weren't necessarily defined by whatever their profession was. So for them, having a class ensured that they had clearly defined roles to play in the party, and they knew what everyone else's roles were. Then there's the endorphin rush of gaining a level. You can't overstate the power of this. Gaining levels feels great. It's a clear goal, and when it's achieved, you immediately see the results. This regular march of goals and rewards is awesome and addictive and keeps players coming back. And with that comes the rush of becoming more powerful. As your character gains levels, they gain hit points, more cool abilities, their spells or combat damage might improve. Challenges that once seemed difficult to them are barely an inconvenience now, such as that goblin at first level when you only had 8 hit points. That thing was an actual threat, but now that you have 60 hit points, that wussy little club of its can't do enough damage to even threaten you, and that feels awesome. Now with levels, at least with D&D, and D&D set the standard for this, that mostly reflects a character's combat effectiveness, a measurement of how tough a character is with both taking and dealing damage, and this owes a lot to D&D's wargaming roots, which it just hasn't been able to escape. Now let's turn this over to skill-based games, or classless games as some people like to call them. I'm not a fan of classless as a title because it kind of makes me think of low class. I've played a lot of these games. Call of Cthulhu and Traveler are probably the most purely skill-based ones, but most of the games that I discuss on this channel fall primarily into this category. With skill-based games, there is no character level or character class. You may have an archetype or careers, but there's no skill or special ability that characters of one profession get that none of the others just don't have free access to. Normally, and again using very broad and general strokes here, characters have a certain number of skill points, probably determined by whatever their stats are, and with them the players buy their skills, and this is going to be all skills in the game. Fighting, driving, picking a lock, first aid, athletics, tracking, all of them. And as the game goes, there's nothing preventing or slowing characters down from attempting or improving any skill that's in the game. Also, because the player is assigning whatever their character's proficiency level is of a skill, at least during the character creation portion, nothing really says how good it is that they have to be with any one skill. So you could have your warrior archetype who's decided not to spend too much of on their fighting skills, while your medic did spend a ton on their combat skills, and now the group's best combatant is also the group's healer. Now, one benefit of skill-based games is there are no character molds. Characters aren't put into a path of how it is they're going to advance, or what it is they will or they won't be competent in. One fun game that class-based players like to play is figuring out what RPG class different characters from movies and books are, such as John Wick. You say that he's got 8 levels a monk and 10 levels a fighter. And your buddy is all, no way, it's the other way around, but also with 2 levels a ranger. Or this Grey Mouser from AD&D's Lankmar City of Adventure. So they took the character from Fritz Leiber's books and they converted him over to AD&D. At his peak, he's 12th level fighter, 15th level thief, and a 3rd level black wizard. Because characters who originated outside of the game usually don't fit cleanly into established classes, we almost always have to do combinations of classes in order to figure out what they are, because not one character class can always show exactly what it is a character from some popular movie or book can do. However, with skill-based games, because we don't have classes in those, we simply just assign the skill points and make that character, and we're done. This is how character creation usually works in a skill-based game. A player comes up with a character concept, and they make that character. There's no debating if they fit better into this class or fit better into that class. A couple weeks ago, I was helping a friend of mine make his first Pulp Cthulhu character. Now, he's been gaming for over 30 years, but almost exclusively in class-based games, and it took me a while to convince him that he didn't have to shoehorn his character concept into a class mold. His experience had taught him that character creation meant that making a character concept and then compromising that in order to fit that into the game system. So the full freedom that he suddenly had was kind of weird to him. Skills improve individually. Now, this can happen a lot of different ways. It is completely game to game. Traveler, you have to study to improve each individual skill very slowly. Cyberpunk Red, you get a pool of improvement points after each session, and with them you can buy individual skill ranks. Call of Cthulhu, each skill that you successfully use in the game has a chance of improving by 1d10% after each session or adventure. You can also just simply enroll your character in school to get training at any time if you wish. You don't have to earn an empty skill slot or anything first, you just enroll in school. So the character's skills improve individually versus all at once whenever a character is gaining a level. And if a player makes a character and then they don't realize that there's going to be some skill that might be really useful, either because no one else in the group took it or that's just kind of the way the campaign ended up turning, they can then just pump a few points into that individual skill once the game has already started. Personally, my favorite method is that outside of enrolling your character into some sort of training, the skills that are successfully used in a game are the skills that improve. So if you regularly shoot bows, then your archery skill improves. If you don't ever shoot your bow, then your archery skill doesn't naturally improve. This is how Call of Cthulhu does it. When we played Cyberpunk 2020, we employed the Interlock Unlimited hack, awarding improvement points to specific skills that were used in addition to the general IP pool. The reason that I like that is because if only the skills that a player is using are the ones that increase, then it encourages that player to become more active and engage in the game more, always trying their hands at different skill roles rather than, sitting back and letting everybody else do that for them. Unlike, let's say, in D&D, where if you have a rogue who never once uses their sneak attack ability until they've reached 12th level, but now they do a sneak attack and they're really good at it, despite the fact that they've never ever used this ability before, that has always annoyed me. This also leads to some interesting evolutions where a player makes a character imagining that they're going to be played a certain way and they're assigning all their skills to accommodate how they imagine they're going to play them, but over the course of several sessions, as they actually play this character, they end up improving in other directions than they expected, following the skills that they actually used, and that unexpected evolution is kind of fun to watch. For example, in Call of Cthulhu, when we first started that, one of our players who's normally the party healer, she declared that she wasn't going to get any first aid skills for her character. Unfortunately, neither did anyone else in the group, so when things went bad and the player characters needed healing, she stepped up, but having no proficiency in it outside of the base 30% chance that everybody had, but over the course of several adventures of her using her first aid, a skill that she never ever had planned to use with this character, she now has a 90% with it from all of her frequent use, and first aid is now her best skill that she has. The other benefit is that characters have a regular flow of improvement, or at least in certain games they do, where every adventure, every session, if they're making their skill checks, some skill is going to raise. Maybe not much, but it is a steady improvement as they're playing. Unlike in, let's say, a class-based game where we don't see any improvement at all until we've hit some sort of experience threshold and then boom, a lot of stuff goes up at once. I already mentioned with class-based games how that sudden improvement can be a lot of fun and addictive, but I personally enjoy the constant and steady small improvements versus the periods of stagnation where nothing improves between level thresholds. Because there are no levels, this usually means that hit points don't increase that much or at all. Characters might become superhumanly good at their skills. They might be able to avoid damage more because their dodge and their parry skills have gone up, but getting stabbed with a sword is probably going to kill them just as easily because, well, they're getting stabbed by a sword. That just doesn't suddenly stop hurting them as much. Now, of course, there are a few exceptions to this, but I always prefer games like that where danger from injuries is always a constant. Unlike that goblin earlier with level-based games, threats remain threatening. A street kid with a switchblade is always going to possess a life-threatening danger. The difference now is that your skill in acting first, or dodging, or disarming them is increased, decreasing the chance of them actually hitting you. Hit points are usually based off whatever the character's stats are, so there's no I have more hit points than you because I'm a fighter. It's I have more hit points because my physical stats are better. Imagine playing D&D where the hit points that your character has is just simply your constitution stat, or maybe your con plus your strength. And outside of any special circumstances, that's all the hit points that you're going to get. Now, stats might increase for various reasons as you play, and if they do, hit points might go up as a result. But even then, I've not encountered the massive hit point rise in a skill-based game that you frequently see in class-based games. Now, there are a few risks that skill-based games might have, one of which is what I call one-trick ponies. I brought this up in an old video years ago, before I fully realized that most viewers didn't know what a skill-based games were, so I didn't explain it in the video, and that led to a ton of confusion. But essentially, a one-trick pony happens when a player pumps all of their starting skill points into one specific skill, boosting it up, or they might start the game out as the very best in the world at that particular skill. Maybe it's driving, or fencing, or computer hacking, but the cost is that they now don't have enough skill points and to put to anything else and making them remotely competent in anything else except for what it is that they're good at. So, if it's sword fighting, they're now the greatest sword fighter in the world once they walk into the game, but they're simply terrible at everything else that isn't sword fighting. So now the player is just sitting there bored and capable of doing anything until they have that opportunity to do that one specific skill that it is that they can do, and the rest of the game session they're just sitting there and watching everybody else play. And because they've already maxed that skill out when they started the character, they're not going to be able to improve in it anymore, so they've essentially peaked their character before they've even begun. Now, thankfully, most newer games like Cyberpunk Red versus the old Cyberpunk 2020 have put measures in place to limit how much of a skill pool that players can apply to any one skill during character creation, essentially forcing them to diversify more and still allowing them the opportunity to improve that key skill once the game has begun. Meanwhile, with class-based games, just the nature of those games forces a bit more rounding of the character to balance them out. They still might be very focused into a specific direction, but they're far less likely to be the over-focused one-trick ponies that you can find in some skill-based games. Now, the flip side to that is what I like to call painfully average. This is when a player is so worried about having a low skill in any one area that they spread their pool out across every skill in the game, which means they're now sucky at absolutely everything. There's nothing that character's actually good at or stands out about them, and now they're this dead weight that the rest of the group is carrying around with them because this character can't do anything. Again, some games have now put measures in place during character creation to help limit this behavior, but not most of them. This one is still going to be a possibility in most skill-based games that I've seen. Finally, one of the benefits that I really enjoy about this is that it's easier to introduce new characters midway into a skill-based campaign. In a class-based, let's say your party is 11th level and one of the characters dies on you, or the player gets bored with their character and they want to play a new one, or maybe you bring in a new player altogether. Then game masters have to debate, should I bring in a character at the same level as everybody even though they didn't actually earn it the way that everybody else did? Or should I bring them in at a lower level and let them work their way up, but now they're weaker than everybody else and might not be powerful enough to keep up with the rest of the party? That's never been an issue for us whenever we've done a skill-based game. Again, there's not usually any hit point gap where the new character walks in with 9 hit points while everybody else is 120, and because the player can place their starting skill points in areas that everyone else might be weak in, or they can begin the game with fighting skills that are at least comparable to everybody else's, introducing a new character mid-campaign has been pretty easy for us. Once again, the whole topic is loaded with exceptions. Cyberpunk Red is very much a skill-based game. However, each of the character roles also has access to one skill or ability that nobody else can get, such as the only way to hack is to be a netrunner occupation. Every other skill they get is wide open and freely available to them and anyone else, but one ability is going to be unique to that character's role. In Alien, while all skills are open to everybody and there is no class levels like 3rd level Roughneck, and hit points are pretty unchanging, only skills that are successfully used are the ones that can be improved, each archetype has access to a few special abilities that none of the archetypes have, so it has classes, sort of, but it also doesn't have class levels. Both of those fall into that gray zone of not being fully one or the other, but totaling everything up, they're far more skill-based than class-based, and almost all players out there consider these games to be skill-based even though they're not 100% that way. Meanwhile, in Cult Divinity Lost, which uses a modified powered by the apocalypse system, that falls more into a class-based. Skills really aren't a thing, it's just your stats. Your character's archetype grants access to certain special abilities, and as you gain gain experience, you have the option to upgrade to a different and more powerful archetype, but you also get to make up whatever it is that archetype is and can do. So it's kind of like you've got a level of this, or you're going to be able to do this class, but you get to make up what the class is and what all makes up that class. It's a little bit different than, let's say, like D&D, where they've predefined them for you. And there's not really levels in the conventional sense. It's just different archetypes. So if I had to choose one for this game, it's going to be class-based. But honestly, it's not really either. It's kind of off doing its own thing. So as you can see, the definition of what makes us class-based versus what makes us skill-based is kind of squishy and pretty subjective. Overall, it simply comes down to your preferences and what all it is that you enjoy. For me, I prefer games where skills and abilities increase individually as the character uses those specific skills and abilities. While a character's occupation might influence certain skills that they begin the game with, there's no limitation on what all skills they possess or how good they are at any of them, or they're not limited in any way where they're not able to use some specific skill. I find class molds to be limiting, where players have to make compromises in order to fit their character concept into some predetermined class. I prefer low hit point games because I've found that it keeps a sense of danger as well as realism. I mean that, we're still using, magic and flying spaceships and fighting giant monsters, so it's not like it's 100% realistic, but high hit points always makes it feel more like a game to me than like some sort of fantastical world, and I found that my players tend to play a lot smarter once they know how fragile their characters are in a low hit point game. But maybe that's just me. Class-based games certainly do have their advantages, and if you prefer those types of games, then great. However, I do encourage that players out there try some of the different games and experience some of those big and some of those subtle differences as you kind of move along that scale of classes versus skills. I have some pretty detailed how-to series for Call of Cthulhu and for Traveler. You might want to check those out, but watching a video about a game and playing that game are very different experiences. Because while you might have enjoyed all the way that things work in the current game that you're playing, once you open the door and you've started playing other types of games, you might find a system that you ultimately prefer. On a totally unrelated note, this video marks my first attempt at using an actual teleprompter. This thing was paid for by my patrons. Thank you guys, this thing is awesome. 5 years ago when I started this channel, I had no equipment or any clue how to edit. I was just doing this on a whim, and if you go back and watch my progression through those early videos where I was discovering my style and my equipment got slowly, maybe a little too slowly, better and better as I kind of overcame all the technical learning curves, but honestly never imagined that in a couple years I'd be winning industry awards as upgrading to real equipment. So this thing is awesome. So thank you to all my patrons for your support. Hopefully I'll get through the learning curve of this thing pretty quickly. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews or RPG philosophy, just hit that subscribe button. Till next time, amigos, y'all have a great day. You forgot to mention the real reason that you don't like level-based games is because you don't want me to ever reach 8th level. Kudos to anybody that catches that old reference.